Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. And I think we've got an interesting stream coming up today. I am joined as ever by my streaming companion, American Ostrakon. Thanks for joining me, man.
As always, Auron, it is a pleasure to be here.
So I wanted to have this stream because obviously everything is going on with the Ukraine right now. And we're going to get into a lot of different aspects of this, but my main focus is not going to be the battle itself, though we'll talk about some of that too when you have someone like Ostrakon on who has some experience in this area. You certainly don't want to skip that aspect, but the thing I wanted to focus on today, as you could probably tell from the name of the stream, is how cartoonish the the leaders, the media, the people who are supposed to be in charge, who are, as we've been told so many times, the adults in the room, how cartoonish they have become in all of this, how rapidly we've switched from a pandemic that was decimating the world population to that basically vanishing overnight, how this has become the most important thing in the world that everyone in the United States has to have an opinion on, and the childish way that so many people have approached it. But before we get too deep into this, I would just want to do a general disclaimer. I think it's dumb that you have to do this, but it's the first thing that everyone says. So I just want to get it out of the way. To be clear, I don't support anyone in this war, Ukraine or Russia or anyone. I have no sides. I am an American. I don't know anyone who lives in these countries. I have no connection to them. I feel bad for innocent people caught in the middle of any conflict, but I'm also just aware that like history isn't over and that wars are going to occur. And I think it's really unhealthy that in the West and America in particular, we have this attitude where we have to emotionally invest in every other conflict around the world. It's not how I think pretty much any other civilization has operated. I don't think it's good for us. And I think it ends up getting you a lot of this childish stuff that we see online and in the actions of our leaders. So I'm not here stumping for Putin or Zelensky or anyone else. I don't have a team. I don't have a side. The only thing I really care about is the way that this is going to impact life here back in the United States, which it definitely will, because we can already see gas prices rising. We can already see leaders using it to blame, they're blaming supply chain issues on this. Things that have existed for months are now being blamed on a conflict that's literally happening on the other side of the world. So we can already see this is going to be the new thing, the new mechanism to distract from the incompetence and the terrible way that the West and that the United States is being run. So that aspect I care about, but outside of that, I do not have a side here. I'm not. So this is not about supporting anyone or shilling for anyone. And I just want to get that away because, like I know, said, anytime you bring any kind of criticism on either side, people are immediately, oh, well, then why you must be backing this person or that person. And like I said, I think it's deeply unhealthy on an individual and a cultural level, but it is how we've been trained. It's how we've been trained in the system of democracy. Everybody has a voice. Everybody has an opinion. Everything is you have to be heard. And this is the social media thing too, right? Because everyone has a voice, it's almost a requirement that you go on and you denounce the new thing or support the new thing. And if you don't, you look suspicious. And like I said, I just think that's really unhealthy and a terrible way to approach this stuff. But that said, let's start with just a little bit of the military aspect of what's going on. Ostrakon, one thing that I've heard from a lot of people, something that's been pushed a lot in the media, is how long this is taking. And I think you had some good insights into this. A lot of people, it was very weird. They're like, oh, well, Russia should basically just conquer the Ukraine in 2 days. Like they have very much had this U.S. in Kuwait style idea of how this was going to go, and the fact that it's stretched into what, like a week at this point. A lot of people are saying, well, that means Russia's losing and it's over for them. You told me a little bit about Russian tactics and why they might be different, and kind of why things are developing the way they are. So, could you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So we've been seeing a lot in the media how the Ukrainians are putting up stiff resistance, mostly around large cities, and that this is an indication that the Russian army is more likely to be unsuccessful in their eventual, let's say, conquering of the Ukraine. Uh, the thing is Russian um, Russian army tactics are a bit different than American army tactics or what we've seen or what we're used to. When you look at the way the American military deals with um, a ground campaign, they usually they'll go out, they'll meet their points of resistance wherever they're getting the most pushback from the enemy, and then they'll saturate, they'll saturate it with close air support or strategic bombing, and basically you hit a hard. Long story short, you hit a hard point, and then you obliterate that hard point with overwhelming firepower. Now, the Russian military or the Soviet tactics, which have are basically the same thing at this point, are a bit different in that they work in waves. So what you've seen some of their least trained or their conscript troops and some of their oldest equipment being sent out in the first wave, and that's just the way that they operate. And when they meet a point of resistance, their job is either to pull back or it is to just circumvent that point of resistance and move on to the next target that's a bit softer. And then your second and your third waves usually have better equipment, more specialized troops, let's say better trained troops, veterans, if you will, that tend to go and then attack those hard points. So when I saw on the news, just like everyone else is like, oh, they're putting up stiff resistance, they're pushing them off. Is like they're kind of sort of pushing off the first wave, and so it's not really accurate what's being reported in the news in that sense.
What do you think about the idea that Ukrainians can turn the tide here? A lot of people, I think, off the bat, were assuming that Russia, like I said, would roll through this, and then when things slowed down, the media was saying, "Oh, the Ukrainians, they're going to be able to turn this around. They're going to be able to mount a defense. This is why it's so important to the U.S. lends aid." They're arming the civilians. They're forcing every fighting age man into this. What do you think are the chances of Ukraine either holding this off until a peace deal has to be negotiated, or actually turning back the tide? Do you think that that's something? I know this is all speculation, but do you think that's militarily something that's within their reach with an enemy like Russia, or is that
I
very
mean,
hopeful?
it depends on whose will breaks first, I would say, right? So um, we're basically getting to have our cake and eat it too with this conflict. We're providing money and ammunition, but not personnel. I mean, we're providing training personnel, I'm sure, but we're not providing, let's say, frontline troops, actual soldiers to fight this conflict. So I think American policy at this point is just kind of to bleed the Russians dry within but on the other hand, like, you're doing that with Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. That's how you're bleeding them dry. You're taking untrained or poorly trained people, you're training them up a bit more, you're handing them very targeted weapon systems that target armor and close air support in the attempt to basically bleed the Russian military dry, but you're doing it at the cost of Ukrainian lives. So what I mean by that, I mean, really, this has just turned into, or will turn into, another low grade conflict that's going to last for a very long time. I think Russia's going to have an appetite for a long conflict. I think they did the math on it, and um, they're going to be in this for quite a while. This is going to be a multi-year long conflict at the end of the day, because we're not going to be willing to commit, let's say, significant forces on the ground. The West is not going to be willing to commit significant forces on the ground, just money and equipment and volunteers. And they're not going to want to give up the prize of getting back what they perceive as their lost territory. Does that kind of answer the question you were asking, or was there?
No, I think so. You'd be able the military aid through weapons and stuff might prolong it, but they won't bring enough force to actually in the conflict in a favor of Ukraine, which means a protracted conflict in which Russia will eventually have the upper hand, even if it takes multiple years.
Right. So let's say Russia does actually take over the Ukraine. The conflict's not over at that point, right? Just because they've reached the borders of the Ukraine doesn't mean there's still not going to be a long guerrilla war that's going to be taking place over many, many years. And I think that's what they're kind of talking about as far as like a 10 to 20-year long war where, okay, the Russia will claim the Ukraine as a territory and will be in control of the cities and whatnot. But it'll be, we've been fighting the same war for a very long time, and it's just the next chapter in it, right? Ever since the end of World War II, we've been fighting this war. The Cold War never really went anywhere. It was Greece. There was conflict in Italy. There was conflict in the Balkans, in Bosnia and Czechoslovakia. You've got Vietnam, you've got Afghanistan, you've got Cambodia, you've got Afghanistan again, and now we're here at the Ukraine.
That's a pretty good one. But yeah, no, do you think it's possible that they will try to just take those territories that they declared independent? Well, I mean, that they'll take more and then negotiate for those territories and leave, half of Ukraine basically an independent state, or is it kind of all or nothing?
Oh, I see. I think it depends on their success on the ground, whether or not they're going to concede to claiming some of the Ukrainian territory and leaving the rest as like a buffer state. But I really do believe the goal is to take over the entirety of the Ukraine at this point. I personally, and I said this before, I personally didn't believe that they were going to invade at all. When this conflict first started, I didn't think they were actually going to do it, which really concerns me more about how my concern is that most of this has been either explicitly or implicitly agreed to between the West and Russia. They either Putin did the math and basically said, you know what, the US is not going to want to get involved in another conflict overseas after just leaving Afghanistan. Now is a good time for me to reclaim territory in the Ukraine because they're not going to commit troops to this situation. And then on the other hand, they probably also did the math as like, you know what, the U.S. has got a lot of internal um, economic and social issues that they're dealing with right now. They're going to be more than willing to just throw money and weapons at this problem, but not troops, in order to get to shift focus away from COVID and the economic worries here in the United States. So everyone gets to have their cake and eat it too, right? The Russia gets the Ukraine back, which is something that they care about very deeply, recreating the Russian Empire. And our political elites get a opportunity to blame all of our internal cares and woes on an external threat.
Yeah, I had said on Twitter that if Vladimir Putin didn't exist, Joe Biden would have needed to invent him, right? Like you have a desperately unpopular president. He's in the mid 30s in popularity in just the early years of his presidency. He, has a economic catastrophe on the horizon, already kind of slow motion crashing. uh just it's basically the plot from Wag the Dog, right? Like the thing that'll solve my economic and political popularity woes all at once, a war, right? And so and then of course on top of that, the need to quickly pivot away from COVID. We know how essential that's been to their attempts to expand power, and how unpopular those restrictions have been. Kind of a bit of a train wreck and a catastrophe, especially in America, for those policies and their application. They've been trying to kind of back away from them, but it's been a haphazard thing, as parts of the country walk away from masking and vaccination requirements and others don't. But this just creates one big focal point and kind of waves the hand, and suddenly this disaster that has been sitting right under the Biden administration, all the cameras are another direction, and they can just kind of slowly sweep all that stuff back out the side while everyone is focused on this. So it's an incredibly useful tool to be sure. Um, I guess that can take us then to the way that th- many of the people in the media have been reacting to this, right? Uh,
Right.
let's start with the obvious. It turns out history is not over, right? That's the big story here.
It
Uh,
never was.
yeah, right. It turns out that the lines on the map are not permanent. Western liberal democracy is not going to exist and dominate everything in the future forever without being challenged. Things are going to move forward, and that as America's power recedes in the world, consequences of Western hegemony receding will show themselves. Other people, as you've mentioned multiple times on this channel, will be emboldened, and that means that the agendas of people like Putin are kind of back on the table when it's clear America's really not in a place to stop them. And the fact that this
Right.
is true seems to have shocked the world, that other countries have geopolitical and security concerns and desires, and that they will assert them.
But we were talking about this months ago,
Hmm.
before they even mobilized troops to the Ukrainian border. That now that the U.S. is in a whether it's real or perceived, I don't think there's much of a difference really. Let's call it a U.S. in decline. Regional powers are going to exert more influences within their region, and this is exactly what's happened.
Yeah, and so, like I said, it seemed the thing that is really seemed to stun commentators, both those that are supposed to be conservative and liberal, is the idea that like other countries have interests and they will work towards them. Like that seems to be something that is just mystified these people. Well, they're well, Putin is insane. Putin is Hitler. Putin is crazy.
Poot, Pootler.
The Pootler, yes, Pootler has come to take over everything. Like,
He's
yeah,
not insane at all. He's calculating. This isn't some madman. This is a cold, calculating man who spent years working in the working in the clandestine service, and has done the math and has realized that we didn't have the stomach for a direct conflict, and felt that it was a good time to invade the Ukraine and take back what he perceives as is part of the Russian Empire. Like,
yeah, and
there's no craziness about any of this. Like, this is all very calculated.
but there seems to be an obsession about attributing this to him. Again, you can't just say that this person is an enemy and that our enemies have interests and that they are pursuing those interests. They have to be insane and they have to be a Hitler, to the point where there were many blue check journalists and think tank people talking about how Putin was planning to wipe out, just have a second Holocaust as soon as he took over Ukraine. Like, just as far as I know, Jewish people live in Russia, right? Like that's a thing that exists. Like it's very weird that it's not weird, it's entirely predictable, I guess, but that the obsession with transmogrifying him into the basically the devil, right? Like rather than just understanding, like, we have geopolitical opponents, those people have interests. When we are not strong or able to exert our will, or an unwilling to exert our will in an area, they will then exert theirs. Like, it seems in many ways it's like when boomer conservatives have their world shaken culturally. A lot of, I think, neoliberals now are having their geopolitical illusions shattered, right? Like that basically, the world was not just going to kind of stay the way it is, frozen in perpetuity with America on top, while they decided to reallocate assets to like Black Lives Matter, diversity training, making sure that trans women of color climb the ladder. Like, they thought that they could just reallocate all of their assets to those kind of efforts, and that there would be no other consequences elsewhere, and are shocked to find that actually our enemies are paying attention to what you're doing and how things are going. And if you're willing to like explode the blood and treasure and goodwill of your people to like lock your citizens inside for 2 years and destroy your economy, they might figure out now is a good time to make some moves on the world stage.
Yeah, it's I used to, yeah, I guess I used to believe that they were a little more far-sighted than that, like, people in power in general were a little more far-sighted than that, but after my time doing what I've been doing the last few years, I don't believe that anymore. They really are, the people who have their hands on these levers of power really do listen to Twitter and really do pay attention to the whims of the media, and it's terrifying in a way that, it's whatever's directly in front of them that they're focused on. Yeah, I've always believed that the American people, for the most part, they'll focus on something for a week or two and then move on. But what I've found is the American politician does the exact same thing, where they're really focused on whatever crisis or whatever situation is going on that week or the next week. And if it's not solved within a month, they move on to the next thing, whether it's solved or not.
Right. Yeah. Let's see. A quick chat here. Bolero393. Thank you for donations, sir. He says, I know Ostrakon has years of military experience and has actually been in combat, but couldn't you find a blue check marked expert to talk about this war?
Hayuk, hayuk,
Yeah.
hayuk.
No,
That's
we
pretty funny.
we have had an explosion of foreign policy and combat experts over at all of your favorite publications on Twitter this week for sure. So actually, let's go ahead and get into that, because one of the things that I thought was really interesting, like I said, talk about some of the military aspect, but uh, back here on this side, in the states and such, the interesting thing for me, I think, has been the kind of cartoonish approach to this war. Right, we've had a lot of a mixture of a couple things. First, a lot of very obvious uh, propaganda stuff, like the Ghost of Kiev, which is supposed to be some ace, taking out all of the Russians' air power. We had the Snake Island story, where these guys were heroically making their Spartan-esque stand and defying the Russians. The female snipers who were carrying necklaces of ears around as they wiped out entire columns of Russian infantry. And one after one, these things have shown to be false, right? They've been shown to be lies. And rather than the media saying, well, that's bad, we shouldn't jump the gun there, we should have waited for sources, we shouldn't have run with this, we've literally had stories in places like the New York Times. We've had mainstream high profile journalists saying, no, it's fine, like it's actually fine, that like this is the kind of stuff that happens in war and you should just embrace it. Basically, don't be a Debbie Downer. It's okay if we spread all of these lies about what's happening, because, well, this time we're lying for a good cause. Which hypocrisy, can't sit here and go on about it forever, but I think it is worth at least taking a minute to note how insane it is that these people who've spent years talking about the dangers of misinformation, we must ban every person to the right of Mao off the internet because they might say something we disagree with, getting rid of guys like Alex Jones or whatever, the pariahs, they must be banned because they might say something that's gone, getting rid of literally the president of the United States, partly because of information that they think is misleading. And then as soon as they have stories that they like that are just straight up manufactured propaganda, once the lid kind of gets torn off those, like, well, that's fine, it's for a good cause, so we don't care.
Yeah, it, we talked about this the other day, where it's like World War II propaganda, but it's like the World War II propaganda that was given to kids,
Hmm.
but now it's for the adults.
Yeah.
Like it's everything is put through the lens of like Harry Potter and Marvel comics, and it's just very it's not that anything has changed as far as like these conflicts throughout history. It's just like the bar keeps getting lowered as far as the understanding of those conflicts. Like that's what I'm seeing. Like
Yeah, that
it's not that these conflicts have changed, it's the concept of how they're understood has changed, if that makes sense.
It is, and I think the analogy or the example there with propaganda for children is really important, right? Because for those who don't know, I've created a thread on Twitter, which is like World War Clown, and it's just all the most ridiculous takes from high profile people online, and a number of them are people, this long video of all the different people involved and which Marvel character they would be at the end of the Endgame movie. Uh, People painting Putin as Voldemort, just references to all this stuff. It just, like you said, the things that were created. The wartime propaganda is nothing new, and of course, Captain America was wartime propaganda, or was wartime propaganda.
Wartime
Yes,
propaganda.
thank you. Yeah, not war crime propaganda. Yes, was wartime propaganda for, but like you said, it's for children, right? It's a cartoon character. It was not the way that full-grown adults were supposed to interact. Again, I'm sure there were, there were adults who read Captain America at some point, but that was not the target audience for this kind of thing. These people who are now experiencing the world and only have these references. We were talking about this, the tragedy of, nothing new. War would have been understood as the Iliad in most other cultures, right? Like Alexander the Great famously slept with a copy, kept it near him all the time. So it's not that like heroic stories, standing in for what's happening in war or anything new, but talking about the cultural degradation, just to where we've gone from the Iliad to Marvel movies, and people, and I don't think that this is just the new thing. Like, I don't think that, oh, well, that, they had the Iliad back then, we have Marvel movies now, so that's why we understand it that way. I think there is more truth, more humanity, more depth, and a more realistic understanding about what war is and who your enemies are, and what these things mean in, those epics, as opposed to cartoon, Marvel movies based on comic books. And so just this marvelization, this clownish, childlike understanding of geopolitics goes beyond just, these embarrassing, cringy characterizations. We also see really absurd behavior and a kind of dangerous behavior from different actors and public figures because of this. For instance, uh, we saw Lindsey Graham calling for the assassination of Putin online. We've and very similar things where, like, members of Congress are encouraging NATO to declare no-fly zones, to strike the Russians. Sean Hannity talking about how NATO members should just like all hit a column of Russian troops at the same time, and that way they won't know who to shoot a nuke back at. Like, just really unhinged stuff that seems like they're just incapable of taking this conflict seriously. And I don't think that the, kind of the childish marvelization and what's happening with kind of more high profile media and political leaders is unconnected.
Yeah, it's those, people who are like big proponents of starting a nuclear war seem to be fairly suicidal. Like, that's
Mhm.
the whole reason we have brush fire wars these days and we don't have total conflict anymore, is because of nuclear weapons. And I like it that way
Right.
because a hell of a lot fewer people die. As tragic as all of these conflicts are around the world, and including some of the ones that I fought in, the overall body count, compared to World War II or World War One or the Civil War, are much much lower. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of those people who are saying, oh well, let's just roll the dice and see if we can't start a nuclear holocaust.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that up because, of course, World War One
No,
and
it sounds
Two.
sorry. I don't mean to diminish these conflicts in that people die in them. I've had friends who have been killed in conflict, but relatively speaking, it's a very small number of people compared to these global conflicts we fought in the past prior to nuclear weapons.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, like you said, World War I, World War II. Obviously, these are total wars, right? Like these are wars where entire civilizations are mobilized, entire nations, entire peoples, mass drafts. These things are basically advents of democracy in a lot of way, right? We get the levee en masse from France, and everybody else has to start building armies and in greater volumes, and mechanization requires this as well, mass production. And so we end up with these total wars where the entire state has to go to war, and like you said, this creates these giant global conflicts. These brush fire wars, as you pointed out, tend to have far lower casualty numbers, even though obviously many tragedies there as well. But one of the things I've noticed in Ukraine is not only are people trying to instigate this nuclear holocaust, basically, but they're also like really hardcore encouraging civilians and non-combatants to get involved. Now, I'm not going to denigrate anyone for picking up a rifle and protecting their homeland against invasion. Like that is by its very nature bravery. Like that's pretty much the basic definition. And so if you're a person who is fighting for your homeland and you are picking up a rifle to defend it, I totally get that. But there seems to be this insane push to get like every woman and child uh involved in this. I had the picture of the New York Times from the New York Times of a crying school teacher having a AK shoved in her hands and being deployed or something. And it's just, it feels like, look, I'm again, I know Putler's like the worst guy ever, but I got a feeling he wasn't planning to like genocide the entire country of Ukraine. Like he wasn't planning to raise the country to the ground and put everyone to the sword. And so like,
The goal is to rule these people, not murder them all.
yeah, and so this obsession with trying to pretend that like you have to shove every single person into press every person into service or the whole country will be slaughtered. Again, this it's a I feel like they're pushing people towards total war as if it's an inevitability. And I think that's what a lot of people have in their brain is like, well, these people come in and they just, if they take over a place, then they're just going to slaughter everyone to the man. And I wonder, obviously these people don't want to lose the conflict, so I get why Ukraine's trying to do it, but I also feel like there's a very concerted effort to put enough kind of diversity, equity, inclusion porn in front of American cameras until the West feels compelled to get more militarily involved, right? Like, I think there's a definitive strategy where, like, if you can put enough women and whatever, like enough groups that are supposed to be targeted in the Western kind of fiction, if you can put enough of them on camera, being put in these situations, and if we can pretend that Putin is Hitler, then eventually, like, you can just get America involved in the conflict. And that's like a real national defense strategy at this point. In fact, that might be your best national defense strategy, is trying to draw America into a conflict. And I feel like that's a lot of what this is about.
Um, yeah, it's very brave of all these people in the media to be saying all this when it's not their ass on the line.
Yeah, and like I said, I totally respect, and this is again not to denigrate a single person who decides to pick up a rifle and defend their homeland against a foreign invasion. If you don't want Putin there and you want your country to stay autonomous and you are defending it, that is bravery. Like that, I'm not putting that down for a moment. But like I said, I feel like the obsession with kind of showing like women and children being forced in these situations, it feels like I said, like a particular strategy here. Um, Another thing that has been very odd has been the way that different Western corporations have interacted with this. It goes all the way from the very cringy stuff where the basically like Pepsi said they're not going to ship stuff to Russia, and then Coke didn't say anything, and so the official Ukrainian Twitter account was like trolling Coca-Cola and saying like, blood is on your hands if you don't do this. So like we have this weird situation where the governments of nations are appealing to multinational corporations for political support live on the internet in the middle of a conflict where they're theoretically like battling for their lives. And then we also have this situation where Visa and MasterCard, PayPal, a bunch of social media platforms, like basically a bunch of stuff is shutting off Russia's ability to operate financially. And a lot of people in the West are like, "Oh, great! Isn't that great that we can just collapse Russia's financial system without having to fire a shot, and that's how we'll win this war." What's a little more terrifying for those paying attention is basically these corporations who no one elected and are unaccountable to any kind of people who have no connections or ties to any particular nation or are under any kind of government, are able to just shut down a nation when they feel like it, and everyone's just pretending like they can only do this in Russia. It's a little unnerving.
Yeah, you know, it's all virtue signaling at this point, isn't it? Right? Every corporation has to have a political ideology as well. But yet we're still doing business with Russia all while all of this is going on, right? We're still buying Russian products and we're still buying, Russian energy. So that's very indicative of this just being a small scale conflict, right? It's another brush fire war. It's we wouldn't continue to do business with the country we're claiming is literally Hitler, um or is led by literally Hitler, if we weren't just calculating all of this at the end of the day. So our measures are exactly that. Like, our measures against Russia have been very measured, and we've been very careful to only do basically only commit ourselves so far to how we're willing to stop these Russian attacks in the Ukraine. Some economic sanctions, but not others. Yes to some money, but not troops. Yes to some weapons, but not other support.
Yes, and it's also interesting that while you're right, we've been very selective with what we're going to ban and what we're not going to consume from Russia, and it's basically the stuff that won't actually hurt us. But interesting thing is, Russia has, I believe, said that they're going to be shutting down exports of fertilizer, which were already in a serious. There were already serious shortages and supply issues coming down the line from that. A lot of people have been pointing that that's basically an economic time bomb that these sanctions have placed on our doorstep. That down the road, in a few months, when the fertilizer stops coming and the foodstuffs are not being produced in the right quantity, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're going to see the effects of these sanctions, even though it doesn't seem like the big deal stuff is getting banned right now. So while everyone's cheering about shutting down the Apple Pay on the Russia's metro system or something, the price of their grocery bill might double as a consequence, and they don't even realize that, which is why it's terrifying, to have this highly interconnected global order. Everybody loves it when it can shut down the Russian war machine economically, not realizing that we're plugged into it too. And that means that if we rely on anybody like Russia or China, anyone who's allied there, then it can have a consequence. And that only gets more dangerous when we also realize that the Biden administration had talked about punishing countries like India, which had not jumped on board with sanctioning Russia. And so you're creating basically a power block in Asia, where Russia, China, and now one of the most populous countries in the world, India, has you're shoving all these people into basically an allyship against you, and for no other reason than because basically India wouldn't get on board with kind of the world order and in properly chastising Russia here.
But here as we circle back around to domestic issues again, I mean, you talk about, let's say, the grocery bill being double or fuel prices increasing exponentially. Um, if you complain about that now you're with the enemy, right? You're not
Yes.
patriotic enough.
Yes.
What you really care about having to pay double for your the cost of food? That's what you're going to complain about when we're in the middle of a war? You're just evil.
And we've already seen blue check millionaire celebrities saying this, right? George Takei was on Twitter today saying, "Oh well, of course, gas and food prices are going to go up, but that's just you doing your part." And we also saw this with the White House press secretary said the same thing. Oh well, that's just a price to pay for freedom and democracy, which is really convenient that these people who have already been making supply chains issues a top priority, or sorry, have been producing these things. Uh, People who have already been cutting off your ability to get cheap fuel and that kind of thing. People who have already been impacting employment, well, now they have a very convenient person to blame it all. It's not them. It's not their ineffective government. It's Putler. It's all Putler. And if you are saying anything about them, if you're opposing them, if you're complaining about the conditions that they've produced, well, you're actually a Russian agent. You're actually supporting this evil guy, and you just know that this is going to come down the line. Like eventually there will be economic sanctions and there'll be public prices. You can lose employment, that kind of thing, if you voice any opposition to the government, because at the end you're just giving aid to Putler.
Right. I mean, that's what I was saying earlier, that either this was all explicitly agreed upon, right? Everyone agreed, all right, you get the Ukraine back, and then we get to galvanize support in the United States against Russia, or everyone just did the math and realized it's not worth the effort to actually counter the Russian troops in the Ukraine. And then we get all of these benefits as a result. We can blame all our economic woes, we can blame all our social political woes on an external threat. And then if anyone questions otherwise, you must be working for the enemy.
And like I said, you see this all over Twitter. Yeah, again, I have no side, I have no preference. This is not my conflict. But just by pointing out the very obvious fact that the government is doing what it's doing, it's using this as a shield and transition. It's using it to try to bolster its support and its economic numbers in the face of tragedy and have a scapegoat. Just pointing those things out, automatically you're getting accusations of sympathy for Russia and supporting the slaughter of innocent Ukrainians and stuff. And so that's already starting. That narrative's already building. We already have the idea planted in people's heads that Trump was impeached for making deals with Russia, and this narrative will continue forward. Uh, but not to sit on that too long. Let's go ahead and grab some of these super chats that are stacking up here. Don't want to get too far behind. JV for 499, thank you for your donation. Love how Yarvin always said World War II propaganda couldn't fly today, but this level of propaganda is somehow dumber and just as accepted. Yeah, so that's an interesting observation, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's right and wrong, right? I think that Yarvin probably was right, that propaganda was a little simpler, right? In many ways, you could get away with just painting, Germans as like this evil race of people who were trying to take over the world, and no one had a problem with that back then. So in that ways, it was simpler. And today's propaganda is more complex. There's obviously a far more sophisticated propaganda operation happening today, with if by nothing else, with just volume, right? There was only a couple channels with which to receive news and propaganda in World War II. There's about a billion now, so it has to be more complex. But in other ways, because of the way our culture has become more childish, the way that our population has kind of lost, I think, a wider frame and historical understanding of what's going on, that means that you can have some dumber, more simple stuff really push through. again, because so many people have lost connections to more complicated and more culturally deep references like Shakespeare or the Bible or the Iliad, and instead are rooted in things like, you know, Marvel movies and Harry Potter and that kind of stuff. It is very much embarrassing, and so it is in many ways more complicated than World War II, but in other ways far more childish and dumb. So it's a good point.
I I think part of the issue I think Yarvin ran into is there's a fallacy where you assume most people are going to be like you because that's what you are, and
Hmm.
so you if it's like if I believe or if I don't believe it could happen to me, so therefore it wouldn't happen to others. But unfortunately, it's honestly it's not the truth. Most people are fairly unintelligent and are going to buy the lowest common denominator at every turn. Although we did talk about, we'll go off just a slight tangent here off this one. We did talk about how the specifically like the millennial generation never grew up, and part of
Hmm.
that I think has to do with the fact that we were a lot of them were not able, we included, were not able to take those next steps in life because we were no longer financially able to do so. So like it's not that you grow up and then you get the house and family. It's that you get the house and family and are forced to grow up.
Right.
And so you've got a larger block of people in their 30s and early 40s who are still in their 20s mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we really push this idea that you set yourself in order, you have the maturity and the understanding, and then you get these life experiences that make you an adult. But that, like you said,
It's
that's
the other way around.
it's exactly you the what let's be honest, a lot of growing up for people for through most of history is I got a girl in trouble and now we got to get married and have a place to live and I got to have a job to pay all this stuff. Like that is a large amount actually, like an astonishingly high percentage of kind of how people became adults. I got to go to war. Like I'm 18 and we have to fight for survival. And so like we got to go do this stuff. And you're right that because this extended adolescence where we could kind of protect ourselves from a lot of those experiences, or we were denied those experiences because you couldn't do things financially like own a home, that means that people didn't go through those crucibles and so they were able to remain childish and also invest heavily in a lot of that. And this is not to say, I liked comic books. There are Marvel movies I like, but having this frame your entire reality, being these are the only things you can reach for, the only things that you have, these are your entire reference point, the only way that your culture can interact and you can have a common conversation with the average person, that's a bad sign. The very existence of them I don't think is so much the problem, but the fact that they're basically what everyone in our culture relies on to convey like actual meaningful experiences is kind of terrifying. All right. I watches The Watchmen. Again, thank you for your donation. It says, sorry if you already addressed this, but do you think the US dollar will remain the world reserve currency after it has been weaponized? So, and yeah, this is another scary
Yes.
thing. Yeah, yes. That my short answer is yes. That's correct. But to set the stage a little bit before we rush to that answer, yeah, we know that there was a lot of talk about removing Russia from SWIFT, and then I believe it has actually happened, right? Like they're actually out of SWIFT now, and people like the Saudis talking about taking the American dollar off off the table as reserve currency. That's a huge problem for America. Basically, being the world's reserve currency is what keeps our economy floating, and so will this trigger talks about that changing? Yes, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to happen. For the very simple reason that I don't think any of the other parts of the world economy what to do if they take themselves off this thing. I think it's a situation where everyone knows it's a problem, and if they had a solution for it, they already would have implemented it, and they haven't, and they don't, and so there's a lot of posturing about removing the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, but I don't think anyone has a good enough way to transition that without like collapsing the world economy, and so it's kind of a game of chicken that, and no one's really willing to blink on that one.
I mean, what would the currency change to? Like, would it be the euro or the pound? Or, I mean,
Well, some people have threatened the gold return of the gold standard. Um, you
it's not
know,
enough gold. It's not going to
I
happen.
I know.
The economy won't spin fast enough off a gold standard.
Well, and that's the problem is as long as you have a globalized economy, and please, everyone know I'm not an economist or have any, any expertise in this area. So, I'm working off the seat of my pants here, but, uh, with my understanding, you just the expectations of a modern globalized economy simply cannot function off of that kind of currency at the moment. Maybe that can change. Maybe there's ways around that. I know somewhere a crypto bro is screaming it at the screen right now. But like I said, I don't think. Just like I don't think cable television's going anywhere for a while, I don't think the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency is going anywhere, simply due to the momentum and the inability of anyone to currently solve that problem. Uh, but it the fact that the discussion is even on the table did put understandably scare some people, and it does make people more serious about looking for alternatives, even if one does not currently exist, I suppose. All right. Michael Robertson says it's so damn funny to see Putin and Hitler comparisons when the Stalin comparison is right there. World history contains exactly one figure. Yeah, right. And this is where you can see the obsession, right? This is
They won't
how.
even use Stalin.
Right. Yeah. Look, a guy from Russia with totalitarian power. Who's the first person to reach towards? Hitler. Right.
Hitler.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
it's like, guys, you've got one right here.
Yeah.
He's like, you can use that one.
Like I said, and the need to incorporate a second Holocaust it's so clear that kind of the founding of the current world order is the founding narrative is so desperately tied to World War II. It is so desperately them kind of secularizing our collective metaphysic and making Hitler the devil and the origin of all evil. And this is why both sides, right? Like Putin has been talking about holding anti-fascism conferences, right? Like he said he went into the Ukraine to demilitarize and denazify the Ukraine, right? Which, as I understand, is a thing actually in the Ukraine. And so both sides say they're fighting fascism. Both sides accuse the others of being Hitler. Everyone is stuck in this frame. No one can escape it. And there's no better way to see how clear that is than, yes, literally fighting a strong man in Russia. The first person you can compare him to, of course, must be Hitler, not Stalin. Yeah.
The hilarity of this whole situation is this huge push for Germany to like remobilize on top of all this. So it's just like like Germany's like, guys, just to be clear, you want us to rearm, re-equip, and go fight the Russians again? Like, that's what you want us to do? Because while you're calling, the person who was involved in that conflict, Hitler, the person who was leading our country at the time, you're calling Putin Hitler, but you're asking Germany to mobilize against the Russians at the same time.
Yeah, no, I love that tweet. Well, the tweet you sent me, that was, yeah. Just to be clear, you want us to invade Poland, run a bunch of armored divisions through Poland and be prepared to attack Russia. Yeah, that was a good
It's
one.
just this is, yeah, they're so tied to the narrative that yeah, it's very funny. It creates these life's little ironies, I suppose, sometimes.
Sorry, I'm trying to read this next one. I was just trying to understand it. Why would you paint supporting the enemy leaves you in poverty or unable to feed your family? Who wouldn't turn when America is just an idea?
Are
Sorry,
you?
Felix. I
Yeah,
don't
I'm not
quite
quite getting
grasp
that
that.
one.
Yeah.
Are you stating that? I don't understand the question.
Yeah, if you can at
If you
me
want to repost that one,
yeah, I definitely want to get you an answer to that one. But I don't quite understand what you're asking. Let me see if you put anything else in the chat here. I don't see it again yet, but um Why would you paint supporting? Yeah, sorry, I just don't quite grasp that one, man. I appreciate the donation, and if you can clarify in chat, I'm more than happy to take that again. You don't need to spin anything else. Just put an at in front of it so I can actually pull it out of
Next
chat there.
question.
Oflame said the clown world reserve currency is the clown NFT. Yes, absolutely. I always prefer that we go to bottle caps. You know, I'm looking for the Fallout future. But yes, the clown world reserve currency being the NFT.
It's only ever going to go up.
Oh, okay. He looks like he. Okay. Why paint the enemy favorably for day-to-day activities being solved?
Huh? I still don't get the question.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry. Yeah.
Are you? I'm so confused.
Yeah.
It's the words are there. Like it's a complete sentence. I understand all the words individually. I don't know what you're asking. I'm dumb.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry if this one's flying past me. Maybe we're just embarrassing ourselves on stream here. But I don't quite understand that one.
Sorry, man.
Again, if you got a clarifying one, I'll try to grab it. And we'll
Next
go back
up.
to it. Yeah. All right. So let's see. We got to the Lindsey Graham thing. We got to the I'm trying to see if there's anything else here in my thread. Talked about the Ghost Kiev. Did you see the picture of the Miss Ukraine? And they say, oh, she's getting involved in the war, but she just had an airsoft rifle.
Yeah, I've
That
seen
one
that
was
one.
that one was pretty great.
That one gets posted everywhere, and anyone
Yeah.
who's anyone is just like, "That's an airsoft rifle."
Yeah,
That's an airsoft rifle.
I'm trying to look through the different here. Oh, we had the one libertarian who's like, oh, so the Ukrainians want to defend their country. Why don't they all just move? And someone's like, because they want to live on that land. It's like, oh, so nationalism? Like that was. Oh yes, we had the Huffington Post explaining why a small nuclear war might fix global warming.
Oh god, that's a good one, isn't it?
So that was amazing. CBS chiding Ukraine because they're not respecting the trans identity and forcing trans women to fight as men. That one was particularly good. One of my favorites was the Russian cats are being banned from international cat competitions. So Putin, is on notice.
Was
Sorry,
like the
Putin.
Russian blues or whatever? Or
Yeah, they're
because the word Russians in it.
Yes, and we're seeing a lot of this actually.
Chicken Kiev is being
Chicken Kiev being redone. And then what was the other one, man? Oh, they're pouring out all the vodka that has already been purchased
and produced in Estonia for the most part.
Yeah. So just a lot of head smacking decisions there. Okay, I think Felix finally worked one out for us here.
Okay,
I'm asking why you bother to hate enemy. That if we left alone, day-to-day activities wouldn't be bad.
I'm sorry. I don't understand. You're breaking my brain, Felix. That's what you're doing.
Okay.
Are you trying to say that why should we be worried about Russia at all?
I think that's what he's saying is, why would we worry about an enemy that isn't actually impacting us if they're not actually changing? Well, they are now, right? But I don't think they're not invading the United States. They're not directly doing anything that would impact the lives of the everyday citizen. Why would you spend your energy and emotion on that? And that's exactly where I'm at. Is the desperate need to emotionally invest in foreign conflicts that have nothing to do with us. The need to pick sides and be obsessed and like you're cheering for a team is just, like I said, deeply unhealthy. And I'm with Felix on that. If that's what he's saying, is that there's no reason to worry. Like, yes, like people on the other side of the world are doing bad things, but they already were. Russia is in no way different from other countries that are doing those. That's simply the most visible one and the one that we're currently supposed to care about. And so, that's the reason that everyone's obsessed and desperately need to to whip that up.
Um, One of my favorite comments out of everyone so far. I'm just going to call out Kit Spike in here, and that person says the narrative will continue until morale improves.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fairly accurate statement, and it gave me a chuckle.
Oh, okay. Felix says, I don't know how to clarify, but I think you just did here. But trying to say that normally you see the gas go up and they know it isn't from Russia. And yeah, that's what you hope, right? Is that people will see through this. They know that this was already happening beforehand. The decisions that were made before any of this conflict broke out were already taking us to bad places economically and culturally. And so this conflict is not the actual thing. And you hope that the average person won't change their mind or won't be confused by this. Obviously, this does work on some people. It will work on some people. But you do hope that in general, people are able to see past this and understand that all of the conflicts, and I post this stuff all the time. Like, BlackRock doesn't stop buying houses because you're arguing about the Ukraine, right? Like, the people who were destroying your country don't stop doing what they were doing before this. And so I think that I hope that they aren't able to misdirect all of that, that energy, all of that discontent towards Russia, and just treat it like this is a new thing. But and actually, I wanted to make this point, and I didn't beforehand because you brought up something else. But there was a great tweet from Rogue Scholar on Twitter, and he said the key was never waking up the normies. It's never waking up the average person. It's getting to decide what the next thing is, which I think is really important for people to
That's
grasp.
accurate.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's beyond accurate. Like, it's really important for people to grasp that, this, and we talk about this, we talk about elite theory, and people understand that, I think, but I don't think they always take this on board. It's not about going around and red pilling every person. That's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. You're not going to have this moment where you pull back the curtain and everyone sees the Wizard of Oz, and then we all just like transition to a more accountable and better functioning government. That's not how this works. Even if you win, that's not how it works. Winning is getting to decide what the next thing is. The people will always follow what's said. Scott Adams said something. He said, and he's been embarrassing himself quite often, but he said something to the effect of like, well, Russia doesn't need to have a total victory. Once they control the media in Ukraine, they can basically kind of reprogram the average person, and kind of give them the story. And I think it's a little blunt. I don't think it's exactly that. A lot of people will still feel that resistance, but I don't think it's entirely inaccurate either, right? Like, the power to drive the narrative, especially in today's world, is the power. And so it's not necessarily about getting every single person to grasp who's in charge and why and how power works. It's about being the ones that actually get to push the story that the average person is going to rally around. But let's see. Bolero again, thank you again, sir. Do you think Biden will reverse green policy and encourage production if the price of energy goes high enough? Also, Ostrakon for king. So we'll start with the back end first. Once again, Ostrakon, you've been offered the crown. Will you take the purple, or will you refuse it?
No, I'm going to refuse it. I'm going to have my little villa on the Adriatic, and I'll have a goth thought or two, and that's my life. That's my future right there.
I don't know, Bolero. He has thrice
House
refused it, but it's only a
house
matter of time.
house on some country on the Adriatic coast, and a goth thought or two. That's my future.
Yeah. Like I said, that's what they always say until it's time. But yeah, no. So back to the actual question: do you think Biden will reverse green policy and encourage production if price or energy goes high enough? So this is interesting, right? I think that there's a balancing act. These people are like super greedy. They have all of their friends and all of their allies are invested in this green energy push. They understand that rising gas prices are good to leverage people into these kind of things, even if they're not like long-term solutions or they aren't actually better for the environment. It doesn't matter. Like, just moving the energy into those sectors is a positive for them, because they want to reward their friends and punish their enemies. And the people who are investing in green energy are their friends, and the average chud driving a F-350 to work 40 miles every day is an enemy. So it's an easy calculation from that point. The only problem with this balancing act is you can put the screws too hard, right? You can pressure people too much. If the average person is paying $7 a gallon too quickly, it will break them. And once people can't eat or pay rent, then you have a real problem on your hands. It's no longer a nudge in the direction of your friends to reward them and punish your enemies. It's a shove that ends up pushing you off a cliff. So will he back off those policies? I've already seen people like Nancy Pelosi say it doesn't matter. We're not willing to drill on certain lands. We're not willing to back away from this stuff. So I think you'll have a little good cop, bad cop probably between them. You'll have people who want credibility in the party, or are supposed to be vanguardish, people like AOC going, oh, of course we can't sacrifice this. We have to go to green energy. But then you'll have kind of the people who are supposed to represent the moderating influence in the party saying, oh, well, it's an emergency and we have to do it. They'll probably relax maybe some of the restrictions if things get desperate enough, but I think in general they will try to push things in the direction that will benefit their allies. And they might be dumb enough to just kill the golden goose. I don't think these people have a lot of control or a delicate touch anymore, and so they might be willing to just be like, nope, we don't care, burn middle America down on $10 a gallon gas. It's not our problem, and it only helps us. Maybe they're that stupid, but you might see some moderating influences from people like Biden, who are supposed to be, so in theory, the middle of the party. I don't know if you have any thought on that, Ostrakon.
No, you said it on that one. Domestic issues are your purveyance, not mine.
Yeah, I'll let you handle the Russian military tactics. Everybody in their lane here.
Yeah,
all right, guys.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was just going to say that is all of our super chats, and we're over an hour here, so we'll probably go ahead and start wrapping things up. But if you want to sneak a question in, you can go ahead and do it real quick before we wrap this up. I'm trying to think if there's any other particularly good things out of
any good takes on all
thread.
this.
Yeah, I think we
not good, just silly.
Let's be honest. Terrible. The cringe ones, really. Yeah, I think we hit most of the worst stuff. There's the furry BLM alliance endorsing Ukraine. So
sure, why not?
With allies like that, who needs enemies? Total war in Ukraine, trans community most affected was one headline. Let's see. NPR did a story about how to cope with news. So they produce the problem and then run stories on how to deal with the problem they've produced. Just a lot of stuff you'd expect, I suppose.
It's I don't know. It's somehow when the media gets involved with these international conflicts, it seems even sillier somehow than the domestic issues.
Oh yeah, that's one I wanted to get to real quick. So that reminds me. So I don't know how true this is. I don't want to, because there's been so many embarrassing things that have come out and been popularized, and I don't want to be the person who's like, don't believe fake news, and then jumps on this. But so take this with a grain of salt. I don't have any way to verify this, but I have seen that there was a Ukrainian soldier who posted a photo on Facebook with his current location activated. And that informed Russia that Ukraine was staging troops in abandoned school buildings. And so Russia started shelling abandoned school buildings and killed a number of Ukrainian units, because basically this guy posted this thing on Facebook. It made its way to Reddit. Someone from Russia picked it up off Reddit and got it back to the Russian military. and they managed to get a bunch of Ukrainian military killed because they were posting their actual location on Facebook in the middle of a war, which is, you know, the most modern thing that could happen at the moment.
That sounds real.
Yeah, I know.
I
That's the
would,
terrifying thing.
yeah, like whether or not it's true, I don't know, but I would believe it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like I said, I don't want to jump on it and just, you know, do my own Ghost of Kiev, but it does sound far too believable, right?
Hey, just one shout out to the internet for all the Ghost of Kiev memes out there, all the different, because that's some of the funniest stuff I've seen in a long time.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, no,
all the variations on the Ghost of Kiev.
yes.
Um,
Well,
the
someone got a senator, right, with Sam Hyde. They did the Sam
yeah,
Hyde as the Ghost of Kiev,
yes.
and he posted it online. So that was,
Those are some really funny memes.
yeah, the heroes and Frog Twitter out there. We appreciate you doing your part. That's top tier.
Well, you know, I will say this: there's value in that. There's value in pointing out the ridiculousness of things, right? There is value in mockery of the narrative.
Yep. Yep.
It robs him of agency, and I think that's actually important. So while it seems like a silly little joke, I think they're probably taking it as an insult and taking it seriously, because all these silly little jokes rob the narrative of its talking points and just point out the ridiculousness of it, which I think is important. Satire is critical at this point.
Absolutely. Okay, someone's saying it was Adam Kinzinger, who's a congressman. Yeah. In fact, I
There
think,
you
didn't
go.
he lose his election, and he might not still be a congressman, or he's on his way out anyway. But yeah. So anyway, you got a congressman, not a senator, but still excellent work there. Sam Hyde strikes yet again. He cannot keep getting away with this. Yes, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Again, thanks as always for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. All my links for things like Twitter and Gab and Subscribestar and Odyssey and all that stuff are down below. So if you're not on the alt tech channels, make sure you do so, because you just never know when we're going to disappear from here. So good to already be following us. That
Yeah, you know, I really I agree. Yes, and I just wanted. I'm sorry, I kind of cut you off there slightly.
no, go for
Uh,
it.
I I just wanted to say I really appreciate having an audience. You know, it's between me and Auron. This is what we do anyway, right? We just talk about things, and it's kind of nice to have an audience there to bounce ideas off of and have somebody to listen to. But whether it was just one person watching or 100,000 people watching, it's still just us talking about the things that we care about, and I just think it's really cool that we have the opportunity to do so. So I'd like to thank you guys for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ostrakon has been my most consistent guest, and I think he adds a lot to the conversation. So I am, as always, grateful for him for being here. Thank you, everyone who joined us and who donated. Make sure to check out those links and subscribe if you haven't. And as always, guys, I'll talk to you next time.